Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final debate of Lent 2023. Before we get started with tonight's motion, there is an important task that needs to be completed, and that is thanking my team and welcoming next terms. I first want to take the time to thank Charlie, who is Vice President, and Mark Wadey, who are the Communications Officers, for taking over their roles. But now we get to the elected positions. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome the Socials Officer for next term, Alison Matheson. For Equalities Officer, I would like to thank my outstanding Equalities Officer, Shebanya Ghosh, and welcome Holly Sheridan. For Speakers Officer, I would like to thank the incredibly dedicated Sal Widdicombe and welcome Ed Hilditch. For Debates Officer, I would like to thank the very driven and determined Max Ghosh and welcome Nick Davis. Slightly out of the ordinary, I just want to take the time to thank a person who's been by my side the entire time at the union. Calvin Hartley will no longer be Treasurer, and I'd like to welcome Johan Nerlof. If the House will indulge me one last time, I said when I took over this role that I wished for the union to no longer look to bygone days, that I wanted to leave this place ready for it to face the future, that our mission going forward would be to nurture this as a marketplace of ideas where people come together, challenge each other, and be challenged by others, where we strive for progress through the exchange of ideas. This is the final time you'll hear from me as President of the Union. It has been an honor and a privilege to have held this post, and I have really loved it. My role has allowed me to work with so many incredible staff and students. I wish I could name them all, but we are already quite late. But over 100 students have been involved in putting together this term. There have been staff behind the scenes and from the orator, making sure everything works. There are so many people who care about this place and who have given so much. Too often these people are left out of evenings like this. And so in my final act as president, I just want to say thank you to all of them from me. So thank you. Now, all that is left for me to do is to pass on this mantle to my successor. James, you have the chair. Congratulations.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the presidential debate, the final debate of term. I would like to begin by thanking Chris and his team for putting on an outstanding program this term. Before I introduce the motion, there are a few things to note. We're going to begin with two paper speakers in proposition and opposition. We will then have a round of floor speeches. We will then have another two paper speakers, a round of floor speeches, and then we'll finish with the final two paper speakers. Please be respectful to each of the speakers tonight, but most importantly, please be respectful to each other. I'm sure most of you already know the procedures by now. However, if you would like to get involved in the debate, you can do so by saying point of information or point of order, and if the speaker accepts, then you may go ahead. Moving on to the motion for tonight. The motion before the House is this House believes the time has come for radical systemic change. Opening the debate tonight, we have Christopher George. Chris is the outgoing president of the Cambridge Union. He's in his final year studying history. He's also the first person from Wolfson College to have been president of this society. Mr. George, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Tonight is the 16th of March, 2023. 1 in 5 children born tonight will be born into poverty. Depending on where you are born, you can expect to live a decade less than your peers. You might be born to one of the 2 million people who cannot afford to eat every day, or the 17 million who do not have a stable, safe home. No child born tonight should face this. No person impeded by circumstances of birth. But more than this, no one should go hungry or cold or be in poverty because of the decisions they make. No one should be hindered by the choices of those that came before them. Whether you work or don't, housing, health, food, education, these are rights, not privileges. What I believe in, my objective, is liberty, true liberty for all. It should be in each of us to be the masters of our own fate, and that our system should enable us to do so, where we are not merely free from, but free to do. This can only be achieved through the policies of equality. As a hero of this chamber, Lord Chris Smith rightly attested in his presidential debate, liberty is meaningless without equality. Only through a system radically different from our current one can we ensure that liberty, real liberty, is a reality for all that call these isles home. A system that places people before profits, directly empowers and recognizes that it is a tide from the bottom up that can and will raise all boats. That stops treating services like businesses, rights as privileges, where a person's capacity reflects their duty to society, not an entitlement to more. That through universal basic income and inheritance, people can be directly empowered. That we need to implement a system of cooperative management between workers and employers. It requires not merely the redistribution of wealth, but the continuous redistribution of wealth across social, regional, and generational lines. For too long, we have tried to tackle the symptoms and been surprised when the problems do not go away. For too long, we have done what is easy and not what is right. The time has come for radical systemic change, for us to build a fair society, to make a Britain worthy of those that call these isles home. Before the opposition of this motion have their turn, let me say, I know there are things in this world that I cannot fix, that we cannot fix. Things which are unfair, which I cannot right. No matter how desperately I really want to, and no matter how much it pains me that I can't. No matter how many years I spend crying out, I can't fix everything. But this is in our power. It is our choice whether we do so or not. It is only through radical systemic change, the continuous redistribution of wealth, direct empowerment of people, bottom-up economics, the prioritization of the needs of the people above profits, that we can end hunger, end involuntary homelessness, and address the issues of health. Addressing hunger means we first must ensure everyone has the means to acquire the substance they require, but also stop prioritizing the profits of businesses over this right. Stopping farmers being shortchanged and everyone from being overcharged. Addressing the issues of housing. Solving this issue is not just about building more, it's about changing how we view it. No longer treating it like an asset, but a right. If our system says that a nurse cannot afford to live, it is our system that is wrong, not the nurse. We need a policy of housing first, of intervention and control. Addressing our issues of health. It is not just about investing more, and we should and we need to invest more. It is about changing how we approach it again. Building a genuine system of social care, of preventative healthcare, of preventative medicine. That is what we should do. Here the opposition might say, but charity, effective altruism, these things, they can help, they can solve. In response, I don't think we should leave a person's rights to really be dependent upon the whims and fancies of the rich. We should instead have a system in which these rights are made reality, embedded, protected, and advanced. It is only through radical systemic change that we can keep our country united as one and democracy to flourish. This term, this House voted in favour of Scottish independence. We have lost our purpose as a country, our reason to exist as a united entity. It is insufficient to say that something existed before, then it should still be. We must have a purpose as a society, a mission that unites us. We are fragmented and polarized because we do not know what binds us together or why we are. The pursuit of a fair society, of true liberties for all, this is the unifying force that can bind us together. If you wish for our United Kingdom to remain, then you need a radical systemic change and the mission of pursuing a better present and a better future for all. Not just yet. If the government is to govern and continue to govern for the good of the entire society, to stop disenfranchisement through fear and desperation, then we need this change. We need to recognize that political equality, the foundation of democracy, must come first. Markets and their winners cannot be permitted to rule if democracy is to prevail, for the concentration of wealth does and will lead to the concentrations of political power and these people to serve their own interests. Democracy requires explicit efforts to empower people and a system that addresses social and economic inequalities that compromise political equality. We need a system that is for the people and by the people. It is through radical systemic change that we can build a more sustainable and prosperous and innovative future. As the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz outlined, the redistribution of wealth reduces unemployment and drives economic growth. In a fair society, not only will prosperity be more sustainable and widespread, but we will be more prosperous because it is more sustainable and widespread. Yes.
How do you make sure that we don't eat through what we have right now and don't stop investing into the future? We've societies revolving around this egalitarian principle in Cuba, in former Eastern Europe, that did not thrive for decades.
Mm-hmm. So how do we keep the investment in our society? By allowing for progressive taxation of wealth, inheritance, and income, we can invest in our services. Part of the systemic change that I want to see, which I think this House and this country needs, is one which ensures long-term investment in things like empowering people to take risks. And I'll come on to that in just a second. Not just yet. We'll be more prosperous because more people will be able to contribute more. It is human nature to experiment, to push the boundaries of knowledge and capability, to innovate. Now imagine if more people were better placed to do it. In a society that supports them, in a system that reduces risk for them and for their families, where they need not live in fear about the future failure that might impede their children's hopes and dreams, where people have the means to experiment and take risks. That's what makes for an innovative society. I'm going to carry on for a little bit, though. I appreciate it, Harry. It was Francis Bacon who said, "In this theatre of man's life, it is reserved only for God and angels to be onlookers." It is not only a choice whether we fix that which is wrong, to make right that which is unfair, to bring about a better future for everyone. It is a duty. It is time for us to build a fair society, one in which all people have the freedom from and the freedom to do, as a right, not a privilege. To do this, we must ensure the continuous redistribution of wealth, start placing the needs of people before profits, and see that a prosperous, healthier future for all comes from the bottom up. This is the tide that will raise all boats. Max, I'll take you.
You're saying slogans right now. What's your manifesto? We already have like nice ideas. What are you saying is in your 10-point manifesto?
I think a 10-point plan, I think you know, is foolhardy and simplistic. What I have outlined is the fact we do need universal basic income, we need universal inheritance, we need a housing-first policy rather than treating like an asset that allows people to have second, third homes while people are going tired and cold in the streets. We need a progressive taxation system, not just on income, but upon wealth and inheritance to enable us to fund these things. We need to invest more in our education, make it free for everyone, allow education so it doesn't matter if you're born in the north or the south or the east or the west, but actually you are a child of this country, born here. It is our duty and our right as a society that you have every opportunity that everyone else has. That is the manifesto. The opposition might turn around and say tonight, we just need to go back. We had that before, let's go back. No. No. We have not come to terms with the fact that if we are to live in a society where the poor are not punished for being poor, then we have to take action beyond what was done 100 years ago. If we are to live in a society where liberty is a reality for all, then we cannot go backwards. Forwards, unrelentingly onwards is the only way we can go. We cannot wait for the gradual course of time. We cannot waste our moments saying tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. We must say now is the time, that the people cannot wait, that they should not have to wait. They might say, be realistic, be practical. I say it is they who are living in a fantasy land. If they do not believe it is in our power to right these wrongs, I say to those of little faith that the world is built upon what the naysayers of yesteryear said to be impossible. Do not resign yourselves to drown just because they say the shore is too far away. No. We tonight have an opportunity to set ourselves an almighty challenge, to build a system and a society that is fair and just, to bring about radical systemic change. This path will be hard. Sacrifices will be necessary and mistakes will be made. But we will choose this path because that is who we are. We will not do so because it is easy, but because it is right. It is time to say that we do not accept a world where children go hungry, people live in squalor and poverty, lives determined by circumstances of birth rather than the choices made. We do not accept that the world has to be this way, that this world, these islands, belong to us, all of us. No, I'm about to conclude. Tonight, I'm asking this house and those in every household on these isles to dare to dream again, to dare to believe in what our country and we as a people can be, what we will be, what we must be. And we will rise, as we have before, to bend the arc of history. Thank you very much.
Order. Order. Thank you, Chris, for that impassioned speech. Leaving across the House, we have Laura. Laura is a former president of the Cambridge Union. She's currently a third year reading English at Downing College. She won this right to speak through open audition. Laura, you have the ears of the House.
Tough act to follow. Before I actually get to my speech, I want to take a brief moment just to thank Chris, because he's just thanked all his officers, and I do think he himself deserves a bit of praise. Chris's dedication over the past term to this place has been unrivaled. I think it goes without saying this has been an incredible Lent term at the Union. I've been at all the debates, they've been incredible, they've been fascinating. The range of speaker events has been numerous and varied and really quite interesting. And the whole Lent committee have worked so hard to promote free speech and debate, which is what this society is all about. And as Chris's housemate, I can't tell you how hard he's worked to make that a reality. He's been, as I always joke, he's at the Union before I wake up, he's still there when I go to bed. So I think from all of us, can we thank him one more time for that? Now, on to why he's completely wrong about this motion. So, radical systemic change. That sounds very exciting, doesn't it? It's going to be radical. That seems pretty crucial, given the dire state of things that Chris laid out. And it's going to be systemic. So it's going to come in and bulldoze everything and put everything that's failing, replace with something that's great and new. And yet, I must admit, once I've got over my admittedly great excitement, I'm found there isn't that much left in your motion, Chris. History's full of promises like this. In every single time of adversity, it's a fact that popular calls for change, any change, just make it radical, make it systematic, are very common. And they're almost always empty. It's a really wonderful promise. Out with the old, in with a new utopia. A utopia better than you could ever imagine. But once we get behind ourselves and stop imagining a brighter tomorrow, what have we got left? When writing this op speech this morning, I must admit I found myself quite troubled by exactly what I was being asked to oppose. I think the motion wants me to defend the status quo, and then side prop can speak of radical paradigm-shifting change in any direction they want, to any great success they like, and I can only imagine how wonderful that's going to be. And Chris has made me quite excited about it. And tempting as it might be to spend 10 minutes criticizing this motion for sort of not having content, I've just had a wonderful speech from Chris, and I've got a sense of the society you want, and so I'm going to engage on the terms of that. And therefore, I'm going to take radical systemic change from Chris to be espousing the views of Bernie Sanders, Wendy Brown, and Thomas Piketty, the views of the authors of the many hundreds of socialist books that you have lying around the house, Chris, hoping to convert your housemates. So I think we're looking at an economic model that looks a lot like democratic socialism, or a sort of, to borrow Piketty's phrase, participatory socialism. And I will say on this topic that I'm not sure, Chris, you've named a single policy that we can't do with the gradualism that I'm about to advocate for. I don't think overhaul is necessary or called for at this point. So, side proposition have argued very compellingly that our current economic model is doomed to failure, and that swift and radical change is necessary and urgent if we're to address the growing problems of inequality that the UK face. Now, for the avoidance of any doubt, and possibly quite surprisingly, I want to stress that I completely agree with side proposition about every single problem you've identified the world and the UK faces. Inequality is unspeakably high. The climate is under extreme threat. Wealth is concentrated in the hands of the few, while thousands of families are forced to choose daily between going hungry and turning on their heating. Britain's poorest 50% own just 5% of our wealth. I doubt it's controversial to argue this is a completely untenable situation. What I am going to argue, however, is that radical systemic change would make it worse, not better. At every pivotal moment in human history, just like this, radical overhaul has never been and will never be the answer, no matter how easy it seems. Yeah, go for it. I completely support the right to protest. I think the right to protest is a crucial way of refining and improving our system, and I think that all sort of gradual change and improvement we've achieved has been done through that method. I think we've made massive strides in human rights and done great things without radical systemic change. We didn't have to implement socialism to abolish slavery. I need to get through the content of my speech, but thank you. Radical overhaul requires a decimation of everything that we have. It involves a blind desire to start anew, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as it were. And so now, if you'll humour me, I'd like to take us back to 1790 and to Edmund Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. I think Burke is often a figure cast as a man who opposed change wherever it presents itself, in whatever form, a man who wished to preserve the status quo constantly in amber. And this is quite an unfair characterization. Burke opposed slavery. Burke, throughout his career, wrote in favor of American revolutionaries at great political cost. He argued that the Americans justifiably sought fair equality, and he faced great opposition in doing this. He famously wrote to his friend Thomas Hussey in 1796, the first duty of a state is to provide its own conservation, but once secured, the purpose of public authority was to protect the rights of the people. In fact, I don't think Burke would have balked at the phrase people before profit, even if it's a bit ahead of his time. It's an eminently sensible, admirable sentiment, one that I share with you, Chris. The duty of the state must be to its people, to their rights, their livelihoods, their welfare. And it seems completely obvious that must come before companies. In fact, I suspect Burke would place companies at the bottom of the pecking order. What are the instruments of the state if they don't exist to serve its people? What Burke did object to, however, and what I'm objecting to tonight, was radical, unthinking, drastic change. Change that doesn't rest upon a foundation. Change that rests on a few abstract ideals which sound wonderful in principle but won't work in practice. change which casts aside, without thought, what already works. Burke recognized that society and the people that inhabit it are limitlessly complicated. As such, we must handle this fine balance like a living organism. And over time, organisms evolve. They change, ever so gradually, without ever losing the fundamental principles on which they thrive. This is a sort of gradual evolution that Burke advocated for, and that I'm here to argue for tonight. Society is built upon a great wisdom of the ages. We have tried and tested different methods, and we've gradually evolved through trial and error. And this evolution has kept our core fundamental principles and allowed us to move forward consistently as a society. I'm about to conclude, but thank you. Consider how the terms of capitalism have shifted over the last 100 years. In the early 20th century, the proper regime and legal system favoured property owners and landholders over workers and local government in every single instance. Tenants could be evicted without cause. Workers had no right to strike, no cause against wrongful termination. Women were fired from factories when their employers found out they'd got married. People had no access to universal health care, and many went completely without intervention from a doctor because they simply couldn't afford it. The reforms that changed these facts were not revolutionary. They didn't come about through overhauls of a system. They were fundamentally not radical. And therefore, I'm here today to urge you to reconsider the value of gradual development. Income equality must be addressed, as must the climate crisis. But we can do this through incremental evolution to the system that we have. We can pump more and more money into R&D. We can do more research into renewables. We could even, as Chris raised, adopt universal inheritance as Piketty advises. These are all policy areas through which we can drastically improve our society without the sort of overhaul which creates political vacuums, poverty, and chaos. Just as this debate opened, we watched the handover of presidents, and we watched Chris pass the baton to wonderful James, and he'll do a great job. With this, another term at the Union began. This marked a tradition that has happened every term since the Society's conception in 1815. Many presidents have been and gone to the Cambridge Union, and they've come with exciting new ideas for the direction of the Society. But throughout all of this, there's been a preservation of what matters, of our core fundamental principles, and of our unique way of doing things. I'm here to advocate for the conservation of this. We are all capable of great change, incredible change that could transform all of our lives. And I actually don't think any government is ever nearly ambitious enough in setting targets for this sort of change. Think about how much our lives have improved since before industrialization. We should aim, through development and technological improvement, to genuinely eliminate poverty and many other forms of hardship. However, this sort of growth is simply not achieved through blind revolution resting on abstract principles. So today, I urge you to vote to conserve the heart of society. Vote for what works and vote for what matters. Don't just vote for the status quo, because I accept it's completely broken. But vote for the incredible future that we can craft through gradual evolution, through refinement, and most importantly, through preservation of what's important. Thank you.
Order. Thank you, Lara, for that speech. We will now move to a round of floor speeches. You have 1 to 2 minutes to make a case either in proposition, opposition, or abstention. And we will start with anyone who would like to speak in proposition. Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda from Emmanuel College. So I'm not British, but learning and studying and living in the UK for the past few months has been peculiar. So firstly, there has been the cost of living crisis where my own college, Emmanuel College, has to provide discounted meals for students who might struggle to afford a £5 lunch. And secondly, lectures and classes got cancelled because our lecturers go on strike, and it's the largest strike in the UK for the past decade. And also, working on the Lent Ball committee, the Lent Ball has traditionally been one of the highlights of the Lent-term union social event. This year has tragically been cancelled because we can't secure enough ticket sales. So we might think these are just short-term crises, and like things might get better when the inflationary pressure comes down, when we get rid of our prime minister and select a new one. But like, as a semi-outsider, as a foreigner, I can't help but start thinking, like maybe these are just tips in the iceberg. Maybe this reflects some more longer-lasting underlying systemic issues with the United Kingdom. So I did some background research, and I realized that the UK is now the poorest country amongst one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. And I used to think that UK is really rich, but that I realized, according to some statistic, the UK real wage right now is actually lower than 15 years ago. And this calamity has been decades in the making. Back into the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher deregulated the economy and smashed the union, the UK financial sector emerged as the crown jewel of the UK economy. So like the UK economy soared from 1980s onward, driven by the UK financial sector, by London bankers. But when 2008 financial crisis hit, it hit hard, and it sort of just ruined the engine of UK economic growth. And instead of trying to bring back their productivity, focusing on aggregate demand and productivity, the UK government instead frets about debt and pursue austerity. So in the past 30 years, the UK economy has prioritized finance over industry. The UK government has prioritized austerity over investment. And also we are seeing the Brexit vote. The UK has chosen to be a poorer and closed economy instead of an open and richer one. So these are the problems, as George has acknowledged. I think with systemic changes, these are the problems that can be overcome, and I can't wait to see what are the policy recommendations raised by the proposition tonight.
Since there were many hands for proposition, I'll take one other person who'd like to speak in proposition.
I just want to address some parts of Lara's speech. So you're saying that we need slow developmental progress, right? I don't think Chris argued against that. I don't think anyone really is arguing for blind revolution with no morals, no mindset, no views, right? Gradual development is compatible with radical systemic change, because what radical systemic change is a change of mindset. Okay, I can't even fully agree with this motion, because the time has not now come for radical systemic change. It has always been the time for radical systemic change. It's only now that we are beginning to realize it potentially as young people coming into our lives. People before us realized this, and they tried, and they failed. But just because they failed does not mean that it is now not the time. We cannot wait any longer, because if we wait, when we waited before, who suffered? It was not the richest of society. When we waited, when strikers were shot in the streets of Preston at Loon Street, who was suffering? Who did we fail? The system cannot work for us. There has to be a radical overhaul in the way that we view the system, the way that we view society, in order for us to progress, because the system is made to keep us down. I'm not saying to just rip up the system and get away with it, but the way that we view it, the way that we view that it works for us has to change radically.
Our mindset and the way we view the system, if we don't actually do any policy change, affect outcomes in any way?
Because if you change your mindset, you can change your policy. As in, like, the status quo of how we view the economy working for us, and how we view businesses, and how we view people, and how we view the chronically and unavoidably unemployed, these are all mindsets that have to change about what makes people poor, what makes people hungry, who deserves what is human right, and what is an asset, as Chris said.
Thank you, Alex. Would anyone like to speak in opposition to the motion? Jonathan.
When a young left-wing undergraduate at an elite university speaks of radical change, like Mr. George over there, it behooves us all to perhaps raise a slight eyebrow of skepticism. It's worth noting, by the way, that Chris not only studied at Cambridge University, but also studied at Berkeley in America. Need I say more? No, but seriously, I loved Chris's Rooseveltian rhetoric, and I think you quoted both the West Wing and MLK there, which as a young liberal, I really love that. But I just gotta ask, where's the money, Chris? And I heard a bunch of pipe dreams with no practicality, no sense of consequences, a lot of blind hope, not right now, Alex, and attacks on naysayers. And I won't name the politician who said, the problem with socialism, Chris, is that you run out of other people's money at a certain point. That's the problem. What's the radical systemic change? Yes, sir.
So you're saying we're going to run out of people's money, but didn't I not outline in the radical change that we're going to have, we can have a more prosperous economy, we can produce more, we can be more innovative. And as such, the idea that we're just going to use up money does not exist some sort of in a bank vault like Scrooge McDuck. We will not just run out of other people. It's continuous recirculation of wealth, of property, and of capital, which allows for innovation, which allows for circulation. We'll not run out of money. We'll be more productive.
Here's the problem, Chris. I'm unclear. I'm really unclear here. Are you proposing a socialist worker state, or are you proposing an improved social democratic European state? Because we got the latter. It may not be great, but we got it already. I'm an American. If anyone missed that point. I know that. We've got that. So are you proposing a European socialist? I really couldn't tell whether you were Robespierre, Lenin, or Bernie Sanders. You were doing the rhetoric thing, and I hope you're not going to put us on the guillotine when you get into power, although I hope that. But I saw the same blind hope you have. It was the same blind hope of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the Brexiteers. It was that same blind hope that said, I want this, I think this system can work, and I'm not even going to think about the naysayers and the practicality. But more than that, what I'm really surprised at, Chris, not that you're a history student did that, but that you're speaking of this in this country. In the country of the stiff upper lip, of keep calm and carry on, of sitting in the Blitz and drinking a cup of tea. Radical change? Radical change? Aren't things bad enough already, Chris? I think you should leave radicalism, no thanks, I think you should leave radicalism to the young and the heated, the young Americans. I think you shouldn't propose radical change in a country that's about to coronate a king on a wooden chair that's 1,000 years old on a piece of stone, who's going to sit there in tights while a bishop pours oil on his head and says a couple Latin words, and he's going to be mystically transformed. I think there's fat chance of radical change happening in this country. That may be a change. Maybe we should focus on the small things. Thanks.
And finally, could I have anyone who'd like to speak in abstention to the motion? In abstention. Abstention.
I would like to speak in abstention of this motion today because I think it has already happened. Radical change is already upon us. We live in a time of radical change. Go back 50 years ago, not even 100 years ago, 50 years ago, our society would be unrecognizable. Our values have changed completely to the point where it leaves many of us without a clear sense of direction. In fact, we've spoken here today about a lack of faith in institutions and in nations and in countries because our ideas of what matters, our ideas of what is important have shifted drastically from nationalism and mercantilism. You had religious ideas, and then you had ideas of progress, socialist ideas, and now we have a mishmash of all kinds of strange ways of organizing society in the face of technology that we did not evolve for. The rate of change has outstripped the rate of human, societal, and physical evolution for a long time now, and it is only increasing exponentially. No, thank you. We cannot ask whether radical change is going to happen or not, whether we are going to accept radical change or not. It is going to happen. It is going to hit us like a truck. All we can ask, thank you, is how we are going to address this radical change. And that is a very difficult question. We have to ask ourselves, what are the values we are going to create to replace our old values? As you mentioned, we are coronating a king in a 1,000-year-old ceremony. But does that ceremony even mean the same things to us anymore? In this generation, we have royalty doing things that would be unthinkable 30 years ago. Imagine telling someone what is happening to our country when it had just happened. When it's just starting to happen, rather. Imagine telling someone this 200 years ago. It would be unthinkable. And it's happening today. So when we think about radical systemic change, what we really need to think about is what choices we make about what we believe and how we act in the future. How we are going to adapt to a world that is radically different from the world that any previous generation has ever faced before. But we are not entitled to make the choice of whether we change or not. The environment will force us, climate will force us, technology will force us. Just a few days ago, I used ChatGPT to write.
Sir, could I please ask you to conclude?
Sorry?
Could I please ask you to conclude? You've had 2 minutes.
So I will leave with one final point, which is I once read that only fools speak of entitlement. For all you are entitled to is death. That is what the world tells us, but it is not what we should tell each other. If anything, that should be our radical change.
Order. Could I please ask that we keep our floor speeches to 2 minutes maximum? I'm going to allow for one more abstention speech if there's anyone that's very keen to speak. Sammy.
Right, I'll try and keep this to 2 minutes. Presidents are a hard act to follow. So I'm going to start by quoting a conservative, perhaps surprisingly, which was, when the Prussians had rolled over the south of Germany, Disraeli said there is not a single precedent that hasn't been ripped up, and the country that will suffer most is England. And that is to many extent still true today. We are not a country that is able to react quickly to shocks, and by God, we've had a lot of them. The world is being riven by war and militarism. Technological progress threatens to overwhelm democratic societies. And we have to think more and more carefully about how we safeguard the democratic institutions that we hold so dearly. And I agree with the opposition that we cannot simply take a hammer to those democratic institutions or rip up generations of precedent and hope that something better will replace it. But there are also, likewise, consequences to inaction and stasis on the system. For the last 13 years and for many decades before, we've had politicians who have treated the country like a gilded slot machine, who have trivialized people's lives and watched whilst poverty has burgeoned, whilst very little action has been taken. We've had two static mindsets. We've had people with two winnowed horizons, and we've had people use the excuse of institutional continuity to argue for a form of deadly gradualism, a gradualism that, in fact, erodes people's lifestyles. Sure.
Yeah, and on that point, wouldn't you agree that the opposition paper speaker over here was perhaps a little deluded when she argued that in evolving towards good things, we've evolved towards Boris Johnson? Is that a positive evolution of change?
No, it's not. And I think Boris Johnson is a symptom of this slot machine politics. It's a symptom of people with privilege without responsibility, people who will treat the country for fools. But we're in an accelerating society. And in an accelerating society, you cannot rely on mere gradualism alone. So what I will say to all of you, and the reason why I'm abstaining, is that treat your democratic freedoms and treat the institutions that hold us all here tonight, that are the reason that we can speak in this room, with great respect and care. Do not listen to populists who wish to tear it up. But at the same time, this status quo in which we rely on the gilded apparatus of people very much from situations like this union to run our power, to accept politicians with little regard whilst homelessness, poverty and deprivation grow, and to not have those radical horizons poses a real and present threat to our democracy in an era where we have to do ever more to safeguard it. Thank you very much.
Moving back to our paper speakers. Speaking second in proposition, we have Laura Locke. Laura is a second-year reading HSPS at Downing College. She won the right to speak through open audition. Laura, I'm really looking forward to what you have to say.
It's another white bitch talking about radical systemic change. Now, I have got 10 minutes to convince you that our current political and economic systems are fundamentally unfit for purpose and that radical systemic change is the only viable option for securing a just and sustainable future. Easy. Now, I want to begin by expanding on what we mean by radical systemic change, because I agree there's a bit of confusion. And quite simply, I'm asking you to ground this debate in the recognition that we could do significantly better than we are today. We live in a global economic system that is supposed to have tripled in size by the same year that we need to decarbonize it. In a market system that's decided, in the US at least, that dogs are entitled to a longer maternity leave than women, and we have built our societies, education, and health systems around structures that purposefully oppress and discriminate people based on the geographic accident of their birth. I'm shaking a lot, I'm very sorry. Now, radical systemic change isn't a noun. It's not this static endpoint where we're all living in village-sized vegan communities and we don't use iPhones and we sing Kumbaya, though I don't think that would be so horrible. Rather, it's a process, a deeply intersectional process that recognizes that our political and economic structures do not work for everyone. The oppressive consequences of these structures are not an accident. Systemic racism, colonialism, the patriarchy, those aren't mistakes. Rather, those are the very pillars that enable the functioning of our systems. Radical systemic change isn't this abstract concept that requires stepping into an unknown abyss, but a recognition that we could live in a world that doesn't require oppression to simply function. Now, if you've ever had the misfortune of speaking to me for longer than about 10 seconds, you'll know that there's only ever 3 things on my mind. That is politics, men, and climate change. So, quite unsurprisingly, I'm going to center the majority of my argument around these 3 things, demonstrating how our systems have not only created the greatest challenges we're facing and failed to respond to them, but generated hyper-inequality and reinforced this through ineffective structures. So, climate change. A direct manifestation of how our systems do not function, the 6th mass extinction, the crisis that's estimated to be responsible for the displacement of over 1 billion people in the next 3 decades, and the social movement that somehow led to the arrest of Andrew Tate. Climate change is a structural issue that requires connecting struggles of justice from the distributive to the retributive and the intergenerational. It's not the inevitable result of natural cycles, but a direct product of suicidal capitalist systems that have spent decades treating the environment as an economic externality that can be used and disposed of without consequence. Since the 1990s, just 100 companies have been responsible for over 70% of global carbon emissions. And that's not to mention the role of colonialism, the role of indigenous genocide, or the role of neoliberal production practices in systematically, intentionally, and violently operating to extract wealth, concentrate it in amongst a select elite while causing irreparable loss and damage across the global south. The richest oil companies today are quite simply repackaged colonial powers. I mean, Shell was literally born out of the Dutch East India Company. We need to connect these struggles to one another because any change that fails to do so is going to be directly complicit in re-entrenching these structures. Now, this isn't a crisis that can be solved by using a bamboo toothbrush and turning off a light. We cannot answer the climate issue within the same systems of oppression that created it. I love the idea of gradual, incremental, fun times, but it doesn't work like that. We're facing over 4 decades. No, my mental health can't handle that. 4 decades of political inaction and systemic failure. And we won't be able to solve this crisis until we have a system that actually treats it as one. This summer, when for the first time in history the UK hit 40 degrees, media outlets advertised it as a good day to go to the beach. That's like looking at a Category 5 hurricane, and saying, let's go fly a kite. It's ridiculous. Yes, countries are introducing policies. JCRs have green officers. The World Bank has some really, really effective structural adjustment programs. But if we aren't looking at the systemic factors and the origins of modern problems, then we're putting band-aids on bullet wounds when we could be banning guns. No, did you not get the point? I'm sorry. Now, I hope you're keeping up, and if you're not, please do come find me in the bar afterwards, especially if you're single and over 6 foot. I'll have lots of time for you then. Now, with that, moving on to the next key problem. Oh, wait. Men. Former Irish President Mary Robinson famously said that climate change is a man-made problem that requires a feminist solution. Similarly to COVID, the issue of climate has exacerbated crises of gender inequality. Women are 80% more likely to be displaced by climate, and yet they make up less than 34% of country negotiators on climate policy. We are 17 times, 14. I'm a humanities student, I can't count. We are 14 times more likely to die in climate disasters, and yet women under 30 make up less than 1% of global parliamentarians. Now, I'm not suggesting that gender-balanced, diverse parliaments would, solve climate change, end global suffering, and stop conflict. The Tories have shown us that much. But surely, a system that produced such grave inequality cannot produce the answer to it. This isn't about asking for a seat at the table or making more diverse cabinets. The table is fucking broken. The table was ordered off Amazon Prime. Ordered on Amazon Prime with very fast delivery. It's got about one leg left, and even that one's on fire. This is about building a new table, one that isn't enabling exploitation, upholding discrimination, or forcing workers to pee in plastic bottles. I mean, come on. I don't think all men are the spawn of the devil, most of the time. But we cannot address one form of injustice without recognizing how it intersects and interacts with other injustices around the world. We urgently need radical systemic change to put those closest to pain closest to power, because if we're responding to these issues in silos without accounting for their distributed impacts across gender, across race, across class, across health, we're pulling at straws. We're cutting one head off the monster while another three grow. The global architecture has to change. So on a much lighter note, I once shagged a guy who had a Union Jack above his bed. And that was a red flag. I mean, admittedly, a red, white, and blue flag. But his whole point was that the world is better today than it's ever been. As I'm sure the opposition will make, poverty is theoretically at an all-time low. Sure, the world's burning, but we've got 5G. So his argument was the world is better than it's ever been. But I want to ask you, better for who? And better at what cost? Is it really better for the international workers that are propping up the modern economy with no access to unions, zero-hour contracts, and falling pay? Is it really better for the communities that are having to flee their homes due to extreme weather events, or those in London that are already dying as a consequence of air pollution? No. When I'm medicated in a couple months, maybe. Not now. The government of Tuvalu is currently creating a digital nation, because they know that their country won't survive the rising sea levels and they want to protect its memory for future generations. We have a country that is literally moving into the metaverse. Surely that's not better than ever. Surely. Inequality today is higher than it's ever been. Roughly half the world's wealth is concentrated in the top 1%. We've heard this all before. Every year we're breaking records for the hottest year. We can't solve this with incremental fixes. The world for Jeff Bezos may be better than it's ever been, but that's because he's destroying the world for the remaining 99%. And then we got on to my favorite pillow talk, the UN. Now, for shits and giggles, let's have a chat about the UN. Because while our economies and our societies have globalized, our politics remains stubbornly national. Yes, there are exceptions, but ultimately, the political structures that govern the world today are locked into the same power dynamics that formed them in 1945. Even today, where we have a member of the Security Council invading another country, there is no working mechanism to stop that, remove them from the Security Council, or by any means do anything even moderately significant. And now I know that's not fair. But the UN manages to enable the illusion of change while relying on the same historic power imbalances. Exxon scientists discovered and predicted climate change in the 1970s. We've had 50 years. But with political structures that prioritize economic growth, externalize the environment, we don't stand a chance. The UN produced the Paris Agreement, and then Trump pulled out. And now Biden's back in, but Biden is also approving drilling projects in federal lands. We cannot leave our future up to the whims of political leaders, especially American ones. Now, COVID has demonstrated that if we really want to, we can make swift, radical change. Climate and the intersecting injustices that it exacerbates make a clear case for how our systems benefit the few at the detriment of the many. So to those of you who are still thinking of voting for the opposition, I want to ask you, whose interests are you defending? Are you defending those who've acquired their wealth on decades of exploitation? Men with Union Jacks above their bed, which even if you're a virulent nationalist has to be sinful in more ways than one? Or Jeff Bezos, because we all know how much Jeff Bezos cares about you. I know the idea of radical systemic change can feel paralyzing. It's an unknown. What we have is all we've ever grown up with. But everything around us is changing. It's not enough to do no harm. We have to be actively, radically, and intentionally going after a system that serves us all. That means building our own tables, recalibrating our systems of value and development, and fighting for a world that we are actually proud to pass on to future generations. Don't be a part of the problem. Be the entire bloody problem. Fuck with the system and challenge power structures. We can do so much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that eloquent speech. Making the second case for the opposition, we have Lord Greenhow. Lord Greenhow is a Conservative member of the House of Lords. He previously served as the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime in London from 2012 to 2016 and was Minister of State in the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Most notably, he served as President of the Cambridge Union in Lent 1988. Lord Greenhow, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Well, it's fantastic. It's only been an interlude of 35 years to return to this place, and it hasn't changed much. I sat where you sat, and the power seeped away from me, and it was a massive relief. And we shared one thing in common, which was 35 years ago, I chose the wrong motion for my presidential debate. 35 years ago, can you imagine it? This was the time when the wall was coming down, communism was collapsing, and we were at the height of ideology and conviction politics, and I chose the motion, this House believes that packaging has become more important than the politics. Rained against me, I had Douglas Hurd, who was the then Home Secretary. I had the Bill Deeds, many of you may not know, a fantastic newspaper man. Paul will certainly know him. But also next to him was someone you may not know, Sir Giles Shaw, a distinguished backbench MP, had been a former president of the Union. I think he got about 3 blues. But he also worked for Cadbury's. And famously, the best line of the night was, I'm facing Fleet Street, Deeds, Downing Street, Hurd, and Quality Street. But, you know, my debate was wrong for that time, and I think your debate's wrong for this time, because, you know, I come from, you have to look at your heritage when you join the Lords, and going back, mine's solidly working class. Fred Poynton, my great-grandfather, was a founder member of the Independent Labour Party, and in the 1920s, he would have been sitting with you. I would have been sitting with you. Fred had a walk many, many miles to get work. He walked until he found work. He found it in a place called Ilkeston. And he had to sort of work as a labourer, and he did those jobs. And then in Stanton Iron Works is where he got his opportunity to earn an honest wage. But though going to work in those days wasn't like going to work today. In fact, getting people to work, in my experience, is the hardest job today. But going to work was actually, that health and safety was non-existent. People died at work. And so he fought the gaffers. It's a phrase that many of you won't have heard of. He fought the gaffers because he wanted to ensure that you got a decent wage and you were safe. And he worked all his life, and at the end of it, he became mayor of his hometown of Ilkeston and showed great civic leadership. A working class man through and through. His daughter went to the school that my father went to, but she had to leave school at 14. Despite winning a scholarship and having the uniform paid, she left school at 14, but she had the pride to see my father come to this university, the first person in our family to be educated in Oxford or Cambridge or any place, as he puts it. So I'm delighted to be back. But I know where socialism started, and it's got a noble tradition, but it's not what's needed today. And I'm going to make the arguments in simple terms. You talk about inequality, you talk about cost of living, you talk about strikes, and you talk about the NHS. Somewhere where my father worked all his life, Professor Greenhalgh, still an active researcher at the age of 82. You know, when I went into politics and I lost, my career was built on a solid foundation of failure, let me tell you. 10 years in opposition. And the Labour teller came up to me and he said, I always wanted to meet you, Stephen. Your dad saved my life, but I won't be voting for you. I understand that. That's democracy, and we've got that. Let's preserve that. We've got democracy. But also, we've got other problems that are not in the way that you've profiled this debate. We've got economic stagnation. We've got the biggest tax burden since the Second World War, the biggest tax burden on individuals. That's a huge disincentive on enterprise and the things that grow an economy. And I pay tribute to the President, because the President kept it simple. He said, this is all about the redistribution of wealth. Oh, I'll give way. Come on, have you got something to say?
I think the fact that we have the highest tax burden with degrading services is an indictment of status quo politics and not...
And I'm going to make the case for... I'm certainly not making the case of the status quo. I never underestimate the case of the status quo. I'm going to make the case of not being like Robert Walpole. I am certainly no saint. I'm certainly no Spartan, as you can tell. I wasn't this way when I was back then in 1988, I can tell you. But I am a reformer. I do believe in reform. And the way forward is a sort of gradual, evolving reform that makes real difference. And yes, we can see reform, but it doesn't have to be systemic, radical, all-in-one-go reform. Reform can happen, and do you know how it happens? And I'll make the case for that. It doesn't happen by having one way of doing things, one view that comes through from many of the undergraduates tonight, one view that if we share the wealth equally, we'll all be happy. No, it doesn't come from that. It doesn't come from that. It comes from a belief that... No, someone else wants to say something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's not about everyone being happy, but everyone being housed, fed, and healthy.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And as someone that won a council from Labour that had 33% social housing, lots of people in temporary accommodation, I understand the need to have stable homes. And I absolutely think that's not something that is about party. It's about how you achieve that. And the way you achieve that is by ensuring we build more homes. And I went resolutely, as a Conservative politician, to build thousands upon thousands of new homes in areas that were in areas of deprivation. So yes, the point is right, but the question is how you achieve it. And I don't think that's a party political point. We all want safe and secure housing. You want to go again?
Yeah, sorry. We built thousands and millions of new homes, yet people aren't living in them, and you cannot afford them. They don't be building new houses when people's living wage is less than it was in 2007.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think you solve that through slicing the pie equally. You achieve things by, I mean, if you really want to know about how you raise all boats, surely it's about growing the pie. What is going to grow the pie? Then there's more to put back into the economy. I believe certainly in one thing, let me tell you, that's equality of opportunity. Everything we can do as politicians to get the starting... Oh, and I'll take another... Yes, please.
I want to talk about, like...
I can't really get my thoughts together at this rate, but, you know, this is the last one. Go ahead.
Growing the pie. I mean, the problem with that is that's the model that Tony Blair based...
Yeah, good man.
...his government on. And the
He's a Labour man.
he did that is he said, right, we'll have the financial sector will grow lots and lots of money, and we'll use a little bit of that, we'll slice a bit off the top to then fund massive increases in spending on healthcare and education. But the problem was that was based on a bubble, because the financial sector is very prone to rises and bursts. So we're not really going to grow the pie. What we want to do is grow the pie at an inflated rate, maybe scrape a bit of pastry off the top, and then the pie just disappears every 10 years in a business cycle. It's not a very sustainable model. Actually, look at the pie we currently have. We have enough houses, we have enough food in the world, no one should be hungry in the world. All shortage, all need in the world is a political decision. Every famine that we've had in the last 100 years is a failure of distribution and not a failure of production.
Okay. Well, if it's all about distribution and not about growth and enterprise, I don't know which world you've been living in up to now, but I have to say that as someone that recognizes the value of enterprise, I think you're absolutely fundamentally wrong. If you want to see the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, if you want to see the economy grow, you've got to encourage that to happen. It doesn't just happen. It's the sweat of the brow that you see things germinate. And you start a business from a bedroom. You work hard, you have an idea. You've got many chances of failing. You probably will fail. You need an environment that encourages you to succeed. Oh, I'll always give way to the president. The ex-president.
The ex-president. Would you not agree that the thing that stops innovation, people taking that risk, is the idea of failure? Worry about their families, worry about their security, worry about their children. So what we're proposing on this, or what I've proposed, is a way to alleviate that risk, which would allow our economy to be more innovative. Would you not also agree that when someone is starting a company, they are more interested in where the next £10,000 is coming from, the next 100,000, not the next 10 billion or 100 billion is coming from?
Okay, well, you know, unfortunately, Mr. Ex-President, I started a business from my bedroom that today employs over 50 people. Employs people mainly in London, some in the United States, and it's now many millions. And it was from my bedroom. And the thing that drove me is absolutely what you've described, but not in the way you think, a fear of failure. And yes, the first time I started my business, I failed. And what we have to see in this room is people who are prepared to fail and look failure in the eye and don't fear it. I'm going to give way again, because I'm giving way every 2 seconds at this rate. You have to have the fear of failure. You've got to be prepared to fail, but then you get up again and then you try again with a business that does succeed. That happened in my case. So I want all those people in this room that think about enterprise to be prepared to fail, to fear failure, and to embrace competition. Because you know what? I'm going to come to the end of my speech because I've got not much more to say. Oh, please, point of information. I'm giving some information, not a point.
This seems like you're making the case for the rampant individualism that we already have, this idea of fear of failure. What about if it's we that even failed instead of people who are failing? Like the idea that we can start businesses from our bedrooms. When did that happen? About 50 years ago for you? That's not the reality that many
No,
people...
I'm not that old. Let's be clear. I can tell you, I'm not that old.
Okay, let's not get distracted. I'm just making the point that things have moved on.
Oh, well, I know I may not be off this time, but I hope that you'll at least understand this, that we can talk eloquently, as Laura did, about, I think let's write something, hyper inequality, distributive something or other, distributive retributive, economic externality, structural adjustment programs, or we can see the world in my terms, which life is a race. It is a race. I want you all to understand that. I believe it is a race. And let's do all we can to ensure that the start line is as fair as possible. And that needs a lot of thought from policymakers, government, political parties. Let's understand that it was Andrew Adonis's bravery that brought the Academy programme. And it was Michael Gove that built on that with free schools. And that meant in my borough that parents were suddenly sending their children to schools in borough rather than sending them miles away somewhere else. Opportunity is the heart of good policy, and it's often the battle of ideas, bringing them together, that makes a real difference. So I want you to believe in that we have to have equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome. Let's understand, I'm just winding up, and I hope I have wound you up. Let's understand that we have something here. We have freedom. Freedom to have my views without you saying that's not allowed because it's not in my little red book. Freedom to express my opinion. Freedom to believe what I believe, which I know is right in my heart. Oh no, I'm just winding you up. Freedom. Oh, I give way because you might have something good to say. I've got to please conclude, so be quick. Well, I think you're certainly embracing the mood music of the moment. However, I'm making a different case, and maybe some of it hasn't been transmitted to you, but my case is, let there be a clarion call for freedom. Let's understand that we have high levels of social protection. Yes, we've seen in this recent budget that extended. But I believe that the battle is around how we move away from dividing the pie equally and having equality of outcome, and how we supercharge opportunity and ensure that we have greater social mobility. So that's my conclusion.
Could I please ask, it's wonderful to see everyone getting involved in the debate, but could I please ask that if you are making a point of information, that you stand up, make it short and snappy, and that make sure you're making it to the point that the speaker has just made. Moving on to floor speeches once again, if you would like to speak in proposition to the motion, then please raise your hand, as many of you have done so already. Lady just at the back there.
Thank you. May I remind everyone of a great, great woman thinker called Rosa Luxemburg that was not mentioned somehow in this debate yet. Back in the 20th century, she argued for revolution as opposed to a reform. She said that all of the mild reforms just delay crisis that's intrinsic to capitalism for a few decades or so, as it keeps the working class happier in the current economic system for a few years, say, until another slight reform is needed again. And that's what has been happening in the Britain so far. However, under the curtains, the inequality has been increasing since the 1970s, since, of course, the Thatcher, no thank you. For the last 50 years, I repeat, for the last 50 years, so that's both under the Labour and the Tories, inequality in the UK has been increasing, which means that smaller and smaller amounts of people kept piling up more and more wealth. Surely keeping Tories in the government will never revert this trend, nor will post-Corbyn Labour. And today, all the white British people, speakers of the panel, coming from quite privileged position, sorry to say, believe that, on the opposition side, believe that a slight reform will somehow allow everyone to establish a successful business or try many times. If it fails, I don't know where the money comes from in that case. And I think this is a pure delusion. This country has failed so many people and keeps failing it in the current times. And having in mind that the UK is the country that started capitalism, I think it should be the one to start the global, systematic, radical change. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak in proposition to the motion? There was many hands, so we're doing it once more.
Hello. Okay, thank you so much. So, just speaking to the opposition, when you look at this debate, we can always see that the people who are debating on both sides are the same. People whose houses are burning, people who are struggling to survive, the train drivers, the nurses, the teachers, they all want radical change. And people who are privileged, whose houses are not burning, who are just living to a certain degree normally, they believe in a gradual change. Of course, we will see exceptions on both ends, some privileged here and there, but this is the pattern. And this is where the argument is going. If someone's house is burning, no one will ask for gradual change. And this argument is not only failing people who are suffering and struggling and not surviving, failing the young generation, the young lady whose future is threatened by just asking for this gradual change. And gradual change, radical change doesn't mean a revolution, doesn't mean to burn the system. It means, as the second speaker said, to address the root issues and to change them. And we speak about redistribution. We don't want to speak about redistribution. Redistribution is a wrong argument and narrative. It means we want to take from the rich some money back. It's this language of envy. We need to have a redistribution. This cake is enough for everyone. The formula, how we slice it, is wrong. We need to have this pre-distribution, which is fair demand to have a better future for everyone. And thank you.
Would anyone like to speak in opposition to the motion? In opposition.
Thank you, James. Harry Hopkins, Gonville Keys College. Now, there's been a lot said of inequality in this debate. I'd like to know if anybody here knows the statistics for inequality in the UK and where it rose, because actually inequality has been fairly stable since a period of tertiarisation in the 1980s, and that's not just in the UK, but that is across multiple countries, so it's not just due to Thatcher. I will just say this is across multiple countries, not just the UK. If you look at where inequality previously rose, it was under industrialisation, and it then came down again. And this is a phenomenon you see when you have periods of rapid innovation. You will see inequality rise, and it will, not now, Alex, and you will see it come down in time. It's there's the Kuznets curve. And that is what we are currently seeing in the UK. We are seeing we've seen inequality rise with tertiarisation, and over time will come down. You're starting to see it fall under the Tory government. You may not believe that, but statistically that is what has happened. No, Alex. Statistically, that is what has happened. So this House may talk about now being the time for radical change, but actually we are seeing inequality fall, and we are on track for inequality to fall, as per the Kuznets curve. As we saw during the Industrial Revolution in the Victorian era, inequality rose and it fell. As policymakers have to catch up with the changes, as the changes stopped being so rapid, and so workers' rights could catch up, so the workers themselves could catch up, and so there wasn't the supernormal profit to be made that innovation creates. The reason we see high inequality now is because we are innovating. It is because we are growing. No. Sorry, it's a long point, so I don't want to take up too much time. We're going to see inequality come down in time unless we see more innovation, which then lifts all boats. So now is not a time for radical change, because this inequality we're seeing is a good sign. It is not bad inequality. We are seeing inequality because of change, not because of policy failure. And you can see that from the Kuznets curve, and that's my point. Thank you. I know most people disagree with me, but you'll agree in 10 years' time when you're earning a wage and paying taxes.
Order. Order. Thank you. As a reminder, can we please, if a person makes a point of information, please be mindful that if the speaker does not want to take it, that they will not take it. Does anyone want to speak in abstention? John C.
Thank you very much. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock's ticking down. Now, we heard already about a wonderful woman, a wonderful Irish woman, which seems very appropriate as we head into St. Patrick's Day. I'm half Irish, so I'm very happy about that. Mary McAleese, the first female president. Mary Robinson, my apologies, I'm very tired. Law degree, it's horrible. Mary Robinson, the first Irish president, female president of Ireland. Now, she's also chairwoman, in fact, of the Doomsday Clock. 90 seconds left we have, the lowest number we've ever had, because we need change. Now, I'm not here to say whether that needs to be radical change or whether it needs to be progressive, but it needs to be a lot better than what we have now. Because whatever we have now, and I'm no politician, and I don't want to talk about what we do or don't have, what we have now is not working. The Council of Europe was founded to stop there being war in Europe. That's not working. The Human Rights Act came about to stop modern slavery. That's not working. So whatever we do, we need change, and we need it now. I don't think it's okay to say we need radical change with no solutions of what to do. But I also don't think it's okay to say we need progressive change and forget that we're running out of time. Thank you.
Could I also please ask that before you give a floor speech, please state your full name and college for our records. I'm going to do one more round for the abstentions. Thanks.
So, Chris is the best boss I've ever had. I don't say that lightly. But what the hell does radical systemic change mean? I have no idea. Because my radical systemic change, I imagine, is quite different to what Chris's radical systemic change is. My radical systemic change is a pro-growth agenda. It's building. Well, Louis said we have enough houses. Of course we don't have enough houses. It's building loads of houses on the green belt. It's free ports. It's a pro-growth economy so that so we can expand the pie. But When Chris told me about this debate motion wording back in June and told me I had to invite these speakers for this debate, I mean, I did, and I've loved the speakers so far. But I'm, you know, 6 to 9 months on, I'm still confused, because radical systemic change is just good things good, bad things bad. And as much as I love Chris as a boss, I think he is just setting himself up for good things good. So don't let him have the comfort of good things good.
Rounding off the proposition tonight, we have Paul Mason. Paul is an author, journalist, and political commentator. His works in Post-Capitalism and Guide to Our Future. He frequently writes for the NewStatesman and The Guardian. He was previously economics editor for Channel 4 News. Paul Mason, you have our attention.
Thank you, Chair, and President, and thank you to everyone who's contributed so far. It's weird, isn't it? If you speak to a banker and you say, I'm thinking of putting some money in the bank, what they usually say is, put it in now. If you talk to a fund manager, I might buy some shares, buy them now, because it's ABC 101 capitalism. Money has a time value. Action with money taken today can bring multiple rewards tomorrow. Ask the same banker whether we should raise the minimum wage. They always say, let's do it next year or the year after. Should we mitigate climate change? Oh, well, let's have another Paris-type agreement where nothing actually gets agreed. Why we, on the proposition side, are so insistent that now is the time for radical systemic change, and I will come, quite rightly, to what the content of that question means, is because we understand the time value of action. Action taken today can multiply its positive effects on the global poor, on the climate, on the problem I'm about to speak to, of global instability. And therefore, those who argue against radical change and in favor of gradual change, look, I can understand it. I'm from a working class background in the labour movement. We're not revolutionaries. If it were only about sorting out minor issues of dysfunction within the system we have, well, my dad, my granddad, generations before me, their preference was indeed for reform. But we are now talking about systemic collapse, and that's the problem. Please, go ahead.
Both benches seem to agree that there's a problem, and that we need change right away. Why is your table better, and what is your table?
Why is my...
We have this issue of broken tables. What's better about yours?
Okay, well, I am coming to that, but the point I'm making, to reiterate, is that action has a time value. Let's do a quick audit of the problem we face. My colleagues have focused on the economic inequality and the climate catastrophe facing your generation. I will add a third dimension. The world is on fire. The global system is on fire. Globalization is in retreat. It will not be on its advance again in my lifetime, possibly in yours. Possibly. The American Republican Party has been taken over and is mesmerized by the thought architecture of fascism. It is not a fascist party. It now thinks like fascists think. And it summons fascists to the streets. And it summoned fascists to the streets to storm the legislature of the greatest democracy that has ever existed on earth. You have lived through that. And to sit and say, well, let's do something later. 20 years of Western investment in Afghanistan down the drain in 20 days. The Western presence evaporated, and with it, many of the people, some of them known to me, who had invested their entire future in the Western nation building of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Trump walks away, threatens to walk away from NATO. He refuses to sign even a paper saying that the rules-based global order should exist. And then, in February 2022, on the 4th, President Putin and President Xi Jinping sign a joint declaration saying, you know that old kind of global order that your grandparents put into place after defeating Nazism in 1945, that's over. Now, from here to eternity, will be a multipolar world in which we get to decide what freedom, what democracy, what justice, what right means. And it doesn't mean what you mean by it, and it doesn't mean what Eleanor Roosevelt meant by it when she introduced the Universal Declaration. Yes, go for it.
I mean, didn't Biden pull out of Afghanistan and not Trump?
Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, absolutely. I am not complaining about Biden pulling out of Afghanistan. I think the intervention was failed. The point I'm making to you, Madam, is that we are living through catastrophic times for the global order. And it ends after the declaration of Putin and Trump, the world order's over, universalism is over, with the Ukraine war. If you want a vision of the future, wrote Orwell in 1940, in the book 1984. If you want a vision of the future, Winston, picture a jackboot stamping on a human face forever. While my colleague, my NUJ comrade, George Orwell, was way, way out there. Because if you want a picture of the future, and I suggest you do this vicariously, please don't do it. Just find out what is in the video of Wagner Group ending the life of one of its own members with a sledgehammer and some duct tape. I will finish my point and then take you. That is the vision of the future we must fear, sir.
Yeah, I wonder if this is not a little catastrophizing. After 1945, the post-war order you're talking about, we had 45 years of an evil empire, the Soviet Union, of the Cold War. We had ethnic cleansing and genocide in the 1990s in Cambodia, Rwanda, and then the Balkans. And you say now, I see a world order in which the West is uniting behind Ukraine. I see a world order in which the UN and international institutions should stay against China and Russia, should stay by our principles, not radically change.
I'm not arguing for radical change for that point. However, what I am saying is that the total... No, I'm saying this. It used to be the left who were revolutionaries. Now it's the totalitarian right who want to rip up everything. And what they want to rip up is not simply a world order based on liberalism and treaty law and indeed rules, but it's the only order which can achieve what my friend on the proposition bench wants, which is radical action on climate change. There is no radical action on climate change if the rules-based global order ends. And therefore, the answer for us in the West is that we need to make radical systemic change in order that we defend this system against those, the totalitarian regimes, and unfortunately, both on the left and the right, people who think they're right, people who think there's nothing worth defending in the Western settlement, in the collective West. We're going to have to change, and there is a precedent for it, and you mentioned it, sir. I will come to it. What do I mean by radical? You'd expect me to talk about roots. But let me just say, what I mean is everything the totalitarians do, Xi Jinping, Putin, Modi, everything they do has a storytelling quality. It convinces people to take action. It persuades people that we are wrong and they are right. For me, the radicalism has to be action that tells a story. What does systemic mean? It means that we don't replace the chaos we're living through with more chaos. We have to approach it with a holistic vision of the kind of world we want to live in. And let me be absolutely clear, as the author of a book called Post-Capitalism, I'm not talking about socialism. I believe there's no time to overthrow capitalism before the climate change massive chaotic effects kick in, and therefore what I want is a capitalist system so different from the one you live in that it will feel like a different system. And I will go on to say what that means. For me, it involves action, along 4 axes. And the first one has been outlined very well by my friend. Decarbonize the world. And if you ask, where's your 10-point plan? Well, I had some misfortune trying to tie my party leader to a 10-point plan when we were electing him. But the one element of it remains. Labour is going to borrow and spend 28 billion a year decarbonising the economy of this country. It might not be enough, but when you see what 28 billion means, you will realise that it's pretty radical. 1. 2, redistribute wealth. The president, the ex-president, outlined how you do that. How we do it is, as Piketty says, we just tax wealth. It's going to feel weird because we only really tax income, we tax wealth. Once we start taxing wealth, shutting down offshore conduits for people to escape the tax system, we will find that we've got money. People say, where's the money coming from? It's coming from the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands. That's where it's coming from. And it's coming back to here, and it's coming back to the poorest part of Cambridge, and it's going to form a children's centre. It's not rocket science, it's easy. Point 3, we redistribute power as well. There is nothing to be achieved without redistribution of power alongside wealth. Point 4, keep on marching down the road to individual freedom. Because the one thing, individual human freedom, the one thing that the totalitarians, the far right, have in common is that they hate what they call LGBT capitalism. Love who you want, celebrate your own culture, be as non-binary as you want to be. It winds them up terribly, but that in itself is the 4th thing. Let me end here. We've been here before. We've been here before because when our culture, when our Western culture and politics was indeed challenged by Nazism, we had to effect systemic change. Keynes, Beveridge, Bevan, Roosevelt, Bevin, these were the avatars of systemic change. And what did it deliver to my family? They suddenly knew they could not starve. They suddenly knew they could not die of a preventable disease. They knew that their lives would be better than their parents'. I'm finishing now. And that my life would be better. Economics editor of the BBC, son of a miner. That's what you get for radical systemic change.
Thank you, Mr. Mason, for that very thoughtful speech. Closing the debate tonight, we have Harriet Baldwin MP. Harriet Baldwin is a Conservative politician who has been the Member of Parliament for West Worcestershire since 2010. She's the chair of the Treasury Select Committee and has previously served in a number of ministerial roles in the Treasury, Foreign Office and Ministry of Defence. Mrs. Baldwin, you have our attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, and I am going to start by saying that the only constant that we have on this planet is change. But what I'm also going to argue is that you're all too intelligent to vote tonight for the proposition. You should vote for the opposition or abstain because you did not hear enough specifics on the proposition to know what radical systemic I'm not going to give way. Haven't we had enough radical systemic change by leaving the European Union recently? Wasn't the pandemic enough of a radical systemic change for you? Wasn't Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine enough systemic change for you? And I will give way to this honourable lady.
Surely the invasion of Ukraine, all of these things, they're manifestations of how the system isn't working. They're not forms of change, they're demonstrations that the system itself cannot function. The crisis of Ukraine... climate crisis have the same roots, and that is our overbearing reliance on fossil fuels. These are not examples of change, but they're examples of failure of the system that we have.
This was going to be my exact next point, which is that haven't we got enough radical systemic change that we need to deal with by weaning ourselves off fossil fuels and making sure that we have clean energy on our planet? I believe that we have the best possible route to achieving that, and that we have not heard enough from the proposition this evening to have any confidence that what they mean by radical tearing something up by the roots, smashing the table, as we heard from the Honourable Lady, is anything that is at all clear that it's going to improve humanity and improve our lives. I am going to start with the submission that what we need on this planet is peace. We need democratic values. We need liberalism. We need capitalism that creates and motivates and gives jobs to people, makes people prosperous, and one which is responding to people's needs and allows people to flourish. As Kierkegaard once said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, and we must make these kinds of changes. And as one of the old people in the room, in fact, I'm probably the oldest person in the room this evening, I think I can share with you some, well, 62 I am. Anyway, I think I'm going to share with you some of the wisdom that I have acquired in my 6 decades on this planet. And I can assure you that it is liberal democracy in a capitalist economy that is the best way to bring freedom, prosperity in the broadest numbers in any society. So let's look backwards for a moment. First of all, as Churchill said, there are many forms of government that have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time, like radical systemic change. I believe Churchill was right. Take communism. I'm not going to give way again. Now, when I was your age, I have to confess that I studied at Oxford. Boo, hiss. And I studied Russian and French. And as part of my degree, I went to Moscow during the time when it was the Soviet Union. I saw that life under communism is misery. It was equality, but it was equality of misery. And at that point, I realized that I hadn't been involved in politics, but my politics was the opposite of that misery that I saw across the Soviet Union. There was no food at all in the shops. There were no private businesses. There were no job creators. There were no cafes. There were no restaurants. Nobody was smiling. Are you going to defend communism?
No, I'm not. Misery under capitalism. There's no point in creating jobs when you create an underclass who's unable to take them. If you say you see misery under communism, yes, you do, but how can you defend the status quo when you see the same misery?
So are you supporting radical economic change that's not going to create jobs? I mean, I really do think that we need to worry about the lack
Order. Could I please
that we heard
ask that members
proposition.
Respect.
When you end up with the whole economy...
Could I please ask that members respect the speaker tonight? Please do not shout out. And if you'd like to make a point of information. If the speaker accepts, then you may speak. Thank you.
Yeah. When your whole economy is run by the state, no one is enriched, where 5-year tractor production plans set out all economic activity, you discover failure and misery. And communism failed because it didn't deliver for people and because there was no peaceful way to have a democratic transition. Take the radical systemic change of North Korea. A socialist republic. Would you want to live in North Korea? Anyone here want to make a point of information that they would? Have you seen pictures of North Korea at night from space? There are barely any lights on at all. I've silenced them. Right, compare it to South Korea. South Korea. It's a thriving, blossoming, free, democratic society. From space, it glistens with lights, it's flourished, and it's even given the world K-pop. Okay, perhaps I'm losing the argument there. What, you mean like jobs? Like jobs, prosperity, capitalism? I mean, what we didn't hear from the proposition tonight was what radical systemic change even means. Who would suffer? Who would be the losers? Who would be the winners? In the radical systemic change of Venezuela, for example, it's the poorest who are suffering from hyperinflation. And I heard the proposer of tonight's motion mention that one of the things that he wanted to do was to redistribute wealth. It sounds like a great soundbite. But where's this wealth going to come from when those who would create it have it seized and redistributed? I think you misunderstand the nature and motivations of the wealth creators. I also heard an argument for a universal basic income. Now, even the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has said, and you know, it's universal, so it goes to people who already have a high income, that it actually would create too many losers amongst the poorest families. It would dramatically increase, I'm quoting from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation here, it would dramatically increase the number of children living in poverty. It is not the solution that you are looking for. But perhaps you want something even more radical. It's another kind of radical systemic change. You want a revolution, perhaps. Let's take a revolution like the one in Iran, where they thought they were just deposing the Shah, and they ended up with an Islamic republic. Or perhaps your radical systemic change is one where you get rid of the monarchy. I hear that's been voted for in this union. So I do hear a few revolutionaries who perhaps, you know, would favor the guillotine. So perhaps they would want to grow up as revolutionaries after the French Revolution or as women in the Islamic Republic of Iran. But I don't think those societies
Order, can we please allow our speaker to conclude? Thank you.
Because they have an elected head of state. But perhaps the radical systemic change that they are talking about means their side winning power forever and denying the electorate the power to make a peaceful transition of power. Now, we saw last year on Capitol Hill just how precious and how fragile is the peaceful democratic transition of power. It's something we've taken for granted for so many years. Are those the people you want to have the radical systemic change in this world that you seek? The people who stormed the Capitol wearing that helmet, topless, and tattooed shamans? No, I will not give way. I am urging you to vote against tonight's motion because what we need is what we've got: the liberal democracy, healthy capitalism, backing the next generation with great education, making the change to clean energy, having public investment in strong modern infrastructure, having a rewarding business environment where wealth creators, where job creators can flourish, having progressive taxes like the progressive taxes we already have on wealth and income, to pay for a welfare state, a safety net that makes sure that no one has to go without. I give way to the radical systemic communists over here. Yeah. First of all, you're talking about relative rather than absolute poverty. You're talking about, in the proposition today, you were talking about the need for more housing. I agree with that. But you don't get more housing by what we heard from tonight, which was the distribution of wealth by tearing away from the people, as happened in the Russian Revolution of 1917, their homes, their assets, and their wealth. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, change will be a constant in our lives, but it should be channeled towards greater prosperity and greater opportunity for all. A thriving public sector and healthy wealth creation, yes, taxed in a progressive way, will provide for people's needs, respond and adapt to change, and especially climate change, effectively. And today in the UK, unemployment is at an almost 50-year low. Record amounts are being spent on our public services. We enjoy prosperity with a purpose in this country. It is to serve the free citizens of our beautiful liberal democracy. Do not sign up for the blank canvas that is radical systemic change. Vote no or abstain.
Thank you, Harriet Baldwin. Whilst the academic term may have ended today, we have not, and tomorrow we're going to have two amazing speaker events. The first will be Bradley Wiggins, who's the former cyclist, and we're also going to have a former US representative, Beto O'Rourke, who has kindly decided to join us tonight, and he's sitting at the back. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to see you here tonight. In this house, we vote by our feet, and we do it by the doors. If you're in favor, then please go down the ayes. If you're against the motion, please go down the noes. If you would like to abstain, please go down through the middle. The results will be announced in the bar. Thank you, everyone, and see you, hopefully, tomorrow.